Hi, we're going to make a base wreath today. So I've just got a 12-inch wreath frame and I've got some pink ribbon here because I've got white basing, so that just shows it off the comparison quite well, or the contrast. So to do the box pleat like we have here, you just need to use your poly ribbon. You're going to do a fold, get your stapler and just staple the edge, or as near to the edge as you can. Just make sure to keep those pleats as even as you can so that the ribbon's sort of flush along the edge there. Try not to flatten those curls of ribbon, just so you keep a nice rounded pleat. So you just keep going until you have enough, but obviously keep measuring it on the frame as you go because you don't want to do too much. So just measure it as you go along to make sure you go. So that's basically what you're going to do until you get to the end. And always leave a little tail, because if you need to overlap the ribbon as it meets, it means you've got a little bit of ribbon left there to do that. So once you've done all your pleating, so I've got some here, what I'm going to do, so I've got one edge with some ribbon on there, so I'm just going to trim that one, and then just using some floristry pins, I'm going to pin just in front of that staple, and then using the line of the foam, so where you've got that hard base and then the actual floral foam, you're just going to pin the ribbon into there. So really make sure to go into that hard base, because otherwise if you just go into the foam, it does just pop back out again. And actually one thing I need to do before I go all the way around pinning that in is I've got a small piece of foam, and this is for my spray. So just bear in mind you are going to have obviously a space, you need the height there because the flowers are going to go in there, so that might just be a little bit too high. So if it is, just trim a little bit off of there, and maybe just round off the edges if you feel like it's a bit too solid. There, that's fine. And then just with some thin pot tape, because there's only a small amount of foam, I'm just going to tape that to the frame. Obviously you need to do that before you put on your ribbon edging, because otherwise you're not going to get that tape around without damaging the ribbon and the pleats. Okay, there we go. And that's that one. So I'm just going to carry on pinning that into the frame. If you didn't want to use ribbon edging, you can use greenery as an edging, so things like leatherleaf, conifer, even soft ruscus, anything like that's good just to create that edge. But with some traditional floristry designs, this is how you would edge it. Okay, so just keep going around centre there. The centre is a bit tricky because it's obviously quite a tight space, so that's why you might want to make your pleats just a little bit smaller, like you can see those ones are. So once you get to the edge, so I haven't cut that purposely just to allow that little overlap. So I'm just going to cut that off there. And then just tuck that underneath, just so you've got a nice, even colour. Ooh, my fingers are wet, so it's slipping. Okay. Try and keep that as neat as possible, so just any bits of foam that come on there, just take those away. And the outside should be a lot quicker. So again, just put the pin in front of that staple and then pin down into that hard foam. And you don't have to do every pleat, you can just do it sort of every 5 centimetres is probably about enough. Being careful not to flatten that ribbon again or to crush it. So you've got to be firm, but obviously handling it quite gently so you don't misshape any of that ribbon. Okay. So you can see my pins aren't that big. They're probably about 2-3 centimetres in length, and that's fine for ribboning. You don't need anything longer or stronger than that. Obviously, if you're using a heavier ribbon, maybe like a Hessian or fabric ribbon, you might want slightly longer pins just to help with that, but generally those ones should be fine. So obviously you've got a bit of an overlap, so I just need to check where they're going to meet. Make sure it's a nice even cut. And again, I'm just going to trim this one here. Take those away, and then just put a final pin in there just to hold that into place. And that finishes that off. What you can do is, if you're worried about the shape, you can chamfer the corners if you want to, but don't take too much away, because obviously you only got quite minimal foam in there as it is, so you don't want to take too much away. But you can just run your knife around just to take away that sharp corner or sharp edge. And again, around the centre. So what we've got to cover the base is some white double. So that's generally what you'll call them. And a very common variety is Zembla. So what we've got here is obviously sort of cut quite a few stems. So you do need to grade them a little bit. So you're going to have obviously bigger heads down to smaller ones. So what you can do, and I've left about sort of 2 centimetre stem on there, and that should be fine. And then what you're going to do is start around the top and just get those in. So you want to get those in nice and compact, sort of sitting nicely together. So you might just want to sort of move the petals along just so you can get it sitting nice and flush to each other. But what you do want is to get those, particularly those top ones, get them in quite sort of in a parallel placement, just so they sit nice and straight. You might need to take a few petals off if they're a bit straggly or a bit bruised. But what you'll find is if you cut them to that length, they should go into the foam quite nicely. But also what you will find is if you put them in so that the flower head just sits on the foam, you should then get a fairly even profile. But obviously you just need to grade as you go along, because the flowers themselves can have sort of angles and different shapes. They might not all be totally uniform, so you do have to sort of grade that a little bit as you go along. Okay. And if something's sitting like this flower here, sort of facing in a slightly different direction, I'm just going to pop it out and just put it back in again, just so it is sitting upright. Again, because we're using them in quite a compact way, these ones are quite, the flowers themselves are quite sort of messy looking, but actually once you start that compact placement, you will find that they should neaten up a little bit. You know, it shouldn't look quite as messy as they do on the stem. So again, just grading that material there. So just putting my hand under the flower. I'm always putting my hand under and around the flower. I'm not pressing down on top, because that's just going to bruise. And though you don't see things like that as you make it straight away, what you will do is sort of come back in a couple of hours time, and that's when you can see bruising. So yeah, just try and avoid touching the top. Always try and work as much as you can with the base of the flower, or the underside. and then just bring that right round. So it's surprising how many stems you need for this. I think here I've cut about 7 stems. So already, you know, we've used up quite a few there. So what we're going to do now is just go around the middle. So what I'm going to do is put these side ones in at an angle. So these will be going in diagonally or in a radial placement, just so that they almost looking up at you. Because if you place them if you do the side pieces horizontally, it will end up looking quite square, and what we want is a bit more of a rounded profile. So do just make sure those side ones do go in at an angle rather than parallel. So the top ones are placed in a parallel way, but the side ones are going in at that sort of radial or diagonal placement. And again, placing them in an even way, and if you cut, again, it's the same length, you should be able to just place them in so that base of that head just sits into the foam, and that will give you good coverage. So this basing method is really important to master, or at least have experience of and have a go at, because you can use other materials for different designs. You know, you could use roses, carnations, sedum, hydrangea. You're basically doing the same thing, so just creating a nice even profile, but with the flowers. So coming right through, so some of the smaller buds, I've got quite a small gap there, so I'm just going to use one of the smaller flowers in there just to help cover that, so you have got an even space all the way around. So again, just the same on the outside, so just going in at an angle, just to give you that profile. So you can see once you get going, it's fairly quick just to get them in. But obviously with this design, you know, the time is, you know, the ribbon edging, obviously the basing, but then we're going to put a spray on top of this as well. So there's sort of different elements to this one. This basing technique can also be used in the lettering. So you'll get the mum, dad, nan, granddad, obviously, you know, people's names are common as well. So you'll be doing this the exact same way. So you do your ribbon edging first, your pleating, and then you put your basing on, and then if they want to spray on that as well, because quite often they will have spray in the sort of first and last letter, you would then add that. Also, the white doubles quite often are sprayed. So if you need, you know, certain colours, particularly if you're doing sort of football sort of colours, because quite often people sporting teams, particularly if you think about colours that you want, that blue, that royal blue, you'll need to use some Oasis or floral flower paint for that, and they just take up the colour. So again, ideally you would spray those before you use them, more for the fact that they would just, otherwise you're going to get paint on the ribbon. But obviously if you can protect the ribbon, maybe put paper under there or something, obviously you could do it on the design. But generally, for neatness, I would say you would probably want to spray before. So these actually had quite a few heads on the stems. So as I say, I think we've used 7 here, which actually is quite good. So normally I would say you're going to be using sort of between 8 and 10. So I'm just going to put that in there. But you can never tell with doubles how they're going to come. You know, they might come with quite a lot of heads on like this one has, or they might come maybe with only 4, so you're going to need a bit more. So it's really tricky sometimes to gauge how much you're going to need. So I would say it's probably always best to have an extra few stems than you think you might need. With some of the small buds like this, if you have got any little holes that you think, okay, I can see a bit of foam, you could go round and put bits in, but just be a bit careful of that, because once you start adding lots more, it's a bit of a never-ending job. But if you do have some points where you think, oh, actually I need to put another one in, obviously just be really gentle and careful how you go in there and just pop another one in. So you could do that. Okay, so for the spray, so very much think about your proportions. So we'll be looking at 1/3, 2/3 here. So the spray should be 1/3 of the overall size of the base. So leather leaf's a good one to use here. So you can bring that round. So I'm going to make it quite asymmetrical rather than sort of double-ended. So just again, with any other design you make, you're going to do your greenery outline first. So just choosing the nice pieces, because you know this is a tribute, you know, quite minimal material for this. So make sure to pick the best pieces. Don't pick like this where the end has come away. It doesn't look quite so good. Pick the nice tips. And then just use that to get your outline shape. So even with this, you're still thinking about profile as well. So you want to get some height in there, but not too high. So if you remember your measurements, obviously for undertakers, you know, you don't want to go any higher than a foot, which is about 30 centimetres as a general rule. You've only got a small amount of foam, but just make sure that everything is placed really quite securely into there. It's going to get handled quite a lot, obviously by the florist, delivery person, then the undertaker. You don't want any of this dropping out. So I have some spray carnations, and I've got some roses here. And some Lysianthus. These roses are quite big. I'm not sure if I might just use 2 because 3 is going to be too many. Also, just for a little bit of a contrast, I've got a little bit of eucalyptus as well. So that can just give, so that one curves quite nicely. So I'm going to use that there. And as with any other arrangement, you know, you do want to think about contrasting materials and having a bit of interest, so it's not just all the same type of greenery. So because I've got the roses as my main flower, I'm going to get those in first. So popping that one into the centre there, and because the main length is going off to this side, I'm going to put the second one in there like that. Actually the third one might be okay. Yeah, I'll put that in. So I can go quite short with these. If you're a bit worried about the length and maybe it's a heavier rose, you could wire the end of that just to support wire it in. And then I'm just going to put that one in here. And just really having that quite deep in there. Because it is quite a big rose, I am keeping it quite tight into the arrangement. But just trying to get a bit of graduation in the placement there as well. So it could just be just to bring a bit more colour out there. So carnations, I've got the spray carnations. These work quite well because they're smaller, so they're quite a nice size. So just like you would normally, bring the buds out towards the edges and then think about using a tighter flower in towards the centre. And even just the little buds that you know you won't open, they're nice to use just as a contrast to the other material. So again, quite an open one there. So I know I can use that maybe a bit closer into the centre, and then quite a tight bud, but actually can just give a bit more shape. Oops. Turn that round just so I can see this side. So sometimes you just have to work so you can get under some of the other material. And you, again, really make sure those stems are in there, that they aren't going to go anywhere. So it's looking quite heavy here. So again, some buds can just help to soften that. Because we don't want, you know, quite often we say about make sure to taper those edges. Don't just have quite a large blunt flower finishing the design off for you. And Lysianthus are quite nice for that because again, you get some nice buds that you can use. And obviously because they are white, just make sure they have got a bit of a backdrop of the greenery or other material just to help. So they are visible. Just getting a bit of, and then we have got some open buds as well. So just picking some of the smaller ones just to help take the white colour through. And again, just keeping it very much in the shape. So bringing some of the buds up, because again just helps to break up the rounder and the bigger shapes of that rose. And just bring some out to the side. Once you've got your main flowers in, you just want to go round and fill in the greenery, just to make sure that you can't see any of your foam. Just looking around the back here, I can see a bit of foam there, so just going back through and making sure that's full. But also just to think about, you know, your even distribution of material. Don't sort of pack in one type of greenery in, say in the front there, just because you know you've got to fill it in. Make sure to make it more of a nice sympathetic blend of material. So if you do need to put a bit more leather leaf in, obviously do that, or other greenery, maybe a bit of asparagus fern, that's always quite nice because it's quite soft. So again here I'm just going to put a bit more of that in there just to break up that there. So bare grass would be nice in there as well, because quite often you can bring the curl round and maybe just bring a bit of the greenery through as well. I do have jute, but I don't think I'll use that. So generally that's what you're looking at. You're looking at a spray that is at least 1/3 of the size of the design and isn't sort of overcrowding and taking over too much of the white. Thank you very much.